I walked into the emergency board meeting expecting another discussion about quarterly results, but my son Ryan cleared his throat and announced that leadership changes were necessary immediately today. Before I could respond, several directors' knotted documents appeared across the table, and Ryan explained that declining performance demanded action, while everyone avoided looking directly at me for several moments. Then came the vote. Hands rose around the room, mine stayed lowered. Within minutes, I was removed as chief executive of the company I built from nothing at all anymore. As security escorted me toward the door, I noticed a revenue figure printed inside. One report, the number was wrong, and that detail stayed with me afterward that entire day. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Harold Bennett, and for 40 years that company was the center of my working life and purpose. When I was 24, I owned one truck and a head full of determination. Evelyn, my wife, handled. Bills encouraged risks and believed success would come eventually despite hardships. Together we survived late payments, broken equipment, difficult winters, and endless competition. Every contract mattered, every customer mattered, and every small victory pushed us closer toward stability and growth ahead. Years later, the business employed hundreds of people. Ryan grew up around warehouses, dispatchers, and delivery routes. I expected him to inherit responsibility gradually while protecting the values we created. Evelyn was the person who kept everyone connected. She understood personalities, prevented arguments, and reminded us that family mattered more than titles, profits, or recognition from outsiders during difficult seasons. When she died unexpectedly, everything changed. The house became quieter, meals became shorter, and conversations felt incomplete. I assumed grief explained the distance growing between family members afterward for months. The first warning arrived quietly. Ryan began holding executive meetings without inviting me. When I asked about them, he claimed they were routine updates, requiring little attention from senior leadership. I accepted that explanation because trust had always defined our relationship, yet the exclusions continued. Important discussions happened elsewhere and decisions appeared finalized before reaching my desk for review anymore. Vanessa managed administration and finances. She started delaying reports, requesting additional approvals, and offering explanations that sounded reasonable individually, but suspicious when combined over time, and repeated often enough lately. Employees who once approached me suddenly seemed cautious. Conversations ended when I entered rooms. Questions that normally reached me first traveled through Ryan, instead creating distance I could not ignore. During one leadership gathering, I entered a conference room and found department heads already meeting. Ryan paused mid-conversation, then said most topics were covered. His dismissal felt deliberate and cold. Later, a supplier asked whether retirement plans were being announced soon. He had heard concerns about my judgment and health from people inside the company. I was shocked hearing that. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some board members suddenly treated me carefully as though I were fragile. Others suggested younger leadership might reassure investors despite operational results at the time. I confronted Ryan privately and asked why these stories existed. He sighed, looked exhausted, and said people were worried about me after losing Evelyn. His answer sounded practiced, not sincere. Then access to financial records became difficult. Requests sat unanswered. Passwords changed unexpectedly. Certain reports arrived incomplete. Every obstacle seemed alone, yet together they formed a pattern impossible to dismiss. Months passed before Ryan called an emergency board meeting. He claimed declining profits required immediate decisions and said every director needed to attend without delay immediately that very same week. I arrived expecting discussion and left, stripped of authority. The board accepted presentations showing losses and failures that contradicted everything I knew about our performance metrics and recent growth trends. After the vote, security escorted me outside. Reporters waited near the entrance, cameras ready. Questions followed me across the parking lot while Ryan remained inside with the directors celebrating quietly. At home, I reviewed archived statements, searching for clarity. The revenue figure I noticed during the meeting appeared different from earlier records, and the discrepancy was substantial enough to matter. I compared documents repeatedly, checking dates, approvals, and source files. The numbers shown to directors had been altered somehow. That discovery became the turning point of my entire situation then. Until then, I believed grief, confusion, and bad decisions explained everything. Now I understood someone had intentionally created false impressions designed to remove me from leadership permanently and completely too. Instead of reacting emotionally, I started gathering evidence. Old colleagues returned calls. Former employees shared concerns. Quietly and patiently, I began assembling pieces of a much larger puzzle ahead now. One retired manager provided copies of internal reports. Another pointed toward unusual vendor payments. Both discoveries suggested money was moving through channels that lacked proper scrutiny or justification whatsoever recently. The more information emerged, the less believable the official story became. Financial problems seemed exaggerated. Operational weaknesses appeared manufactured, and several explanations conflicted with documented records from previous reporting periods. Eventually, I hired an independent forensic accountant with no loyalty to company politics. His job was simple: follow the records wherever they led and report facts without fear or favor. What he uncovered would eventually expose hidden manipulation, restore my credibility, and force powerful people to answer difficult questions. But at that moment, I knew one thing: the fight remained. The company carried my name, my history, and my family's sacrifices. If someone had stolen control through deception, I would uncover the truth patiently, carefully, and no matter the cost. To be continued. A few days later, the forensic accountant called and asked me to meet him privately. His tone was serious enough that I knew the situation was becoming larger than I expected. We sat inside a small office, reviewing spreadsheets, contracts, invoices, and transaction histories. For 2 hours, he walked me through numbers that refused to make sense together. Certain consulting expenses had increased dramatically over the previous 3 years. Yet nobody inside the company could clearly explain what services had actually been provided during that period. The accountant highlighted several companies receiving large payments. Their names sounded legitimate, but records showed minimal activity. Almost no staff and little evidence of real operations. At first, I assumed incompetence, wasteful spending, happens in growing businesses. But then he traced ownership structures and discovered connections hidden behind multiple corporate registrations and entities. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Money left the company through consulting agreements, traveled through shell organizations, and eventually reached accounts connected to familiar individuals elsewhere. That was the first moment I heard Vanessa's name mentioned directly. The accountant did not accuse her immediately. He simply showed documentation linking several entities to people who had professional relationships with her over many years. I stared at the papers without speaking. Vanessa had joined our family. Nearly 15 years earlier, she was intelligent, organized, and ambitious. Evelyn always believed she would strengthen the company and family. For a moment, I wanted the evidence to be wrong. But facts do not care about emotions. As investigations continued, more former employees came forward. Some requested anonymity. Others were willing to testify openly because they feared legal consequences if they remained silent. One accounting manager revealed she had questioned unusual transfers months earlier. Shortly afterward, she was removed from important projects. Another employee reported being instructed not to share certain reports with me directly. Every new statement confirmed the same reality. Someone had carefully controlled information flowing through the company. Someone wanted director, shareholders, and even Ryan to see only selected facts. I began reviewing years of internal communications, thousands of emails, meeting summaries, financial presentations. The deeper I looked, the clearer the manipulation became. Revenue figures were adjusted, expenses were reclassified, profitable quarters appeared weaker than they truly were. None of the individual changes seemed dramatic. Together, they created an entirely false picture of decline. Meanwhile, Ryan continued running the company. Publicly, he defended the board decision. Interviews described leadership transition as necessary. Articles suggested the founder had struggled to adapt. Reading those stories hurt more than I expected. My entire career was being rewritten while I watched from outside. Still, I remained patient. Anger would not restore my reputation. Evidence would. Several weeks later, the accountant delivered another report. This one changed everything. The company had not been declining. It had actually remained profitable throughout most of the period used to justify my removal. Losses existed only because transactions were intentionally structured to create them. I read the report 3 times, then a 4th. The conclusion never changed. My removal had been built upon false financial narratives. That discovery became the emotional turning point of the entire ordeal. Before then, I believed Ryan had betrayed me for power. Now I realize something more. Every major recommendation reaching him passed through the same source. Every warning about performance originated from the same circle. Every argument supporting leadership change relied upon information they controlled. The picture became impossible to ignore. Ryan had trusted the wrong person. That did not excuse his actions, but it changed their meaning. For months, I carried resentment, believing my son had deliberately chosen ambition over family. Now I could see he had been guided toward conclusions someone else wanted him to reach. The real architect was emerging. Meanwhile, regulators reviewed evidence independently. Their findings supported ours. Additional shell companies appeared. Additional transfers surfaced. The total amount involved reached several $1 million. When shareholders learned an investigation was underway, concern spread rapidly. Directors who once supported Vanessa became nervous. Some hired attorneys. Others attempted to distance themselves from earlier decisions. Pressure mounted from every direction. Eventually, I requested a special shareholder meeting. The request could not be ignored. Too many questions existed. Too much evidence had accumulated. The meeting was scheduled for the following month. During those weeks, preparation became my entire focus. Auditors organized records, attorneys reviewed documentation, witnesses prepared statements. Every claim required proof. Every allegation required verification. I wanted the truth to survive scrutiny. Nothing less would matter. One evening, Ryan unexpectedly called. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. He sounded exhausted. "Is all of this true?" he asked. I paused. "What do you think?" Silence filled the line. Then he quietly said he did not know anymore. That answer told me everything. For the first time, doubt had entered his mind. For the first time, Vanessa was losing control of the narrative. The power shift had begun. On the night before the shareholder meeting, I sat alone in my home office reviewing final reports. Stacks of documents covered the desk. Outside the window, darkness filled the yard. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about the years we spent building the company together. Most importantly, I thought about what would happen the next morning. This was no longer about position or title. It was about truth. If the evidence failed, my reputation would remain destroyed. If the evidence succeeded, everything would change. Either way, the deception was finally about to face public examination. By sunrise, every hidden transfer, manipulated report, and fabricated loss would stand exposed before shareholders, directors, regulators, and my own son. And once the facts appeared, on that screen inside the meeting room, nobody would be able to pretend the lies had never happened. To be continued. The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived with a heavy silence hanging over the headquarters. Security had been increased, and the atmosphere inside the building felt tighter than usual. Conversations were short, eyes avoided each other, and even the usual sounds of office movement felt controlled, as if everyone sensed that something irreversible was about to happen today. When I entered the boardroom, I immediately felt the change in how I was seen. I was no longer the founder in their eyes, nor the authority who had built the company from nothing. I was a subject of observation now, a man whose past decisions were being silently measured by people who once followed my lead without question. The long table that had once felt like a place of command now felt like distance. Ryan was already seated near the center. His posture was firm, but his eyes did not meet mine. There was tension in the way he held himself, as if he was carrying responsibility that felt heavier than he had expected. Vanessa sat a few seats away, calm and controlled, her expression unchanged, as though she already knew the outcome of everything about to unfold. The chairman called the meeting to order. Legal representatives and auditors prepared their materials. The independent auditor stepped forward and connected his device to the screen. The first slide appeared. Revenue summary. It looked familiar. The same type of data that had been used to justify leadership decisions in the past. But the auditor's voice immediately changed its meaning. These figures reflect corrected financial data after full transaction verification. A slight shift moved through the room. Attention sharpened. He clicked again. A second version of the same chart appeared beside the first. The difference was immediate. The company had not been in decline. It had remained stable, with several divisions showing consistent growth. For a moment, there was no reaction. Silence filled the space completely. Ryan leaned slightly forward, staring at the screen. I could see the confusion building in him, the first cracks forming in what he had been told for months. The auditor continued, moving into expense records and consulting reports. Multiple companies had received large payments over time, but the documentation supporting their actual work was unclear or missing entirely. Then came the connection mapping. Lines appeared on the screen linking vendors, advisory firms, and internal approvals. And then Vanessa's name appeared within the network structure, not as an accusation, but as a connection point tied to multiple financial pathways and reporting processes. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Vanessa finally spoke, her tone steady but firm. "These are interpretations, not proof of wrongdoing," she said. The auditor responded calmly. "We are presenting verified transactional links," he continued. Email records appeared next, internal summaries, instructions that shaped what financial information reached executive leadership. Ryan's expression tightened as he read. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Why was I never shown this level of detail?" he asked quietly. No one answered. The auditor displayed a timeline of reporting changes, adjustments to revenue classification, shifts in expense categorization, small modifications that, when combined, completely changed the company's perceived financial condition. The most important detail became clear. These changes had begun before Ryan assumed full control. The structure he inherited had already been shaped. That realization changed the entire room. Ryan slowly turned his head toward me. "I was told the company was already failing," he said. "I was told urgent action was necessary." His voice lowered. I believed it. That sentence explained everything that had happened, more than any report or chart. The auditor moved to the final section. Shell companies, layered transactions, consulting fees routed through multiple jurisdictions without operational justification, and finally, the total impact. Millions of dollars moved through structured pathways designed to distort financial reality. The chairman spoke. "Who authorized this structure?" Silence followed. Vanessa did not answer immediately. For the first time, her composure showed strain. Ryan spoke again. "I approved what I was shown," he said. "I never saw the complete structure. That was not a defense. It was realization." The auditor displayed the consolidated executive briefing system. Every report Ryan received had passed through a single controlled pipeline. Every summary was filtered before reaching him. The truth was no longer hidden. It was structured. The chairman called for recess, but no one moved. The weight of evidence held the room still. Vanessa stood slowly. "You all think this is manipulation," she said, "but the company needed direction." I stood as well. "You replaced truth with control," I said. Her gaze hardened. "And what would you have done?" she asked. Before I could answer, Ryan spoke. "You used me," he said. The words were quiet but final. Vanessa turned toward him. "I guided you," she replied. "No," Ryan said. "You controlled what I was allowed to see." Silence followed again. The chairman finally spoke. "A full investigation will begin immediately. Not victory, not defeat, only process beginning." As the meeting ended, people slowly left the room in silence. Ryan remained seated. I walked toward him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I thought I was protecting the company." "You were protecting what you were shown," I replied. His eyes lowered. "I don't know what I destroyed." "You didn't destroy everything," I said. but you trusted the wrong version of truth. Outside, the building continued to move as if nothing had changed, but inside, everything already had. And for the first time since the beginning of this collapse, the truth stood in the open without distortion. After the meeting ended, the boardroom slowly emptied, leaving only silence behind. I remained seated for a moment, watching the documents that had changed everything finally being collected. Ryan stood near the table, his expression lost between guilt and realization. He did not speak for a long time, as if searching for words that no longer existed. I finally broke the silence and told him that truth had never been the enemy, only the manipulation of it. What happened next inside the company would now depend on whether he chose responsibility or continued denial. The legal investigation moved quickly after the shareholder meeting, uncovering every hidden structure tied to Vanessa's financial network. Authorities confirmed that multiple shell companies had been used to reroute funds and distort reported performance. Within weeks, Vanessa was officially removed from all advisory positions and placed under formal inquiry for financial misconduct. Her calm control during earlier meetings had completely collapsed once the evidence became public and undeniable. Ryan eventually requested a private meeting with me away from the boardroom and away from legal observers. When we met, he admitted that his decisions were based on filtered information and incomplete reports. I did not blame him anymore because I understood how carefully the truth had been shaped around him. But I made it clear that leadership requires awareness, not blind trust in a single source of information. The company began restoration under temporary supervision, while financial records were fully corrected and verified. Employees who had stayed silent earlier now began speaking openly, helping rebuild what had been damaged. Standing outside the headquarters later that evening, I looked at the building that had once defined my entire life. For the first time in years, I did not feel loss, only the weight of truth finally restored. The company was no longer controlled by lies or hidden agendas, and whatever came next would now be built on transparency, accountability, and lessons learned the hard way. Ryan stood beside me as the sun set behind the glass walls of the building, finally understanding what he had lost and what he still could rebuild with time. Honesty and responsibility moving forward together. I placed a hand on his shoulder, not as a founder, but as a father who still believed people could change after facing the truth. And for the first time, he did not look away again in silence.